All right, this is like my least favorite thing of ever. Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is really dumb. This aggressively beige car hanging in midair currently is Dylan's 1974 Dodge Dart Sport. We've done a series of videos on this project as we've installed all kinds of crazy aftermarket stuff, creating the ultimate daily driver slash possibly track destroyer. Kind of an all-around neat build. In the last episode, we finally heard this 408 stroker based on a Magnum engine fire up and sound amazing. It didn't have a working cooling system, still doesn't. It didn't have exhaust, and it still doesn't. We're gonna get to that though. And the first time I test cranked the engine, it jerked forward because the wheels were on the ground, and it turns out this brand new TKX was stuck in gear. If you read the instructions, which I actually did, they tell you that it's possible to have the shift mechanism jostled during shipping, and then you won't be able to shift gears, and it may well be jammed in gear, which is what we experienced. Turns out you can't fix this without removing the transmission from the car. That's why you're supposed to check it to begin with. I guess I didn't. These Tremec transmissions are a universal design. You could have a shifter in this position. You could also have a shifter in this position or this position, and there's also an auxiliary rear mount shifter that would connect through an extra extended shaft through this opening. Because this one is configured to shift from back here, it has an extension piece that controls these little shift arm linkagey guys in this main upper cover. The annoying thing is they're not locked to this. So when the shifter is in neutral, these are able to move front and back. And that's exactly what happened here. I noticed in the car with the actual shifter, I was able to move the shifter to one side, that one, I think, it's kind of hard to do with a screwdriver, but not the other direction. And it will not move more than like a 1/4 inch front and back. We dropped the transmission slightly in the car and trimmed a little bit more floor so we could remove this rear shifter cover. There's nothing to see in here. It's just a dumb little ball that goes into a socket and moves this shaft. So we had to drop it all the way out so we could remove this forward cover and take a look at this setup. As you can see, these two pawl thingies do not align correctly. And that is because this one on the right-hand side is moved forward from where it should be. It should sit just like that. With that done, this linkage actually does what it's supposed to. It moves to both sides, and I'm confident I can now engage a gear. Obviously, when this transmission was assembled, this would have been aligned correctly. It would have been in neutral. This is a known issue. These bits of linkage can get shifted during shipping. Personally, I don't know how that's possible, because it sure seems like it would take a good bit of force to move that. It also seems to me like your transmission would see a similar amount of force going down the road, you know, in your car after you've installed it, but what do I know? Anyway, this is fixed now. It shifts. We have neutral, and that's great. Now, all we have to do is put it all the way back in the car, which is a giant pain, by the way, because these transmissions are huge. All of this wants to ram into the transmission cross member. It's really super dumb. Did we void the warranty by removing this plate? I don't know. Maybe. It had to be done. I'm sure this is what tech support would have told me to do if I called them. Obviously, I could have learned this by reading the instructions, which, again, I swear I did. But this is apparently a neutral safety switch. You can tell it lives in a little slot here in the shifter, and as soon as it's in gear, any gear, that ball will be depressed, and then that would no longer give a neutral signal. So that's cool. Maybe we'll wire that up to our starter relay since we don't have a clutch safety switch in this car. The reverse light switch is actually located over here on the side. This is some kind of electronic speed sensor. No idea what systems that's compatible with or not compatible with. Incidentally, one thing we hadn't done is remove this plug to put the Speedo drive and cable in here. We probably would have had to drop the cross member to do that anyway, because I'm pretty sure it goes through this gap. So at least we're solving that problem with this debacle. Now we're getting the speedometer stuff set up. This, of course, is the cable provided by Silversport. It connects to the A-body speedometer directly and then pops into the TKX. This is the gear that they spec'd to match with our rear gear and tire size. It's held on with this little metal clippy thingy, and there's also an O-ring you stick inside here, which I don't think is really going to do anything. Anywho, we're going to install this now. It sits something like this, and again, I'm fairly certain this cable sits between the torsion bar cross member and this transmission cross member. That's how it was on the Red 71 Challenger anyway. With that done, it's ready to swing back up in the car. Alan loosened the dirt guard on the bottom of the bell housing. We can now reach the slave cylinder and hopefully align that on its pin as the transmission goes back in. We had to do a bit of a dance to get the transmission down because it's so huge. The shaft ended up like all the way down here. So yeah, this is going to be a little tricky. At least we'll be able to verify that the input is going where it belongs and that all of the shims are still in place when everything's said and done. Transmission is back in and tight. I didn't film that. Too many swears, but I do have some notes for you. You cannot drop this out of the back of the engine with the shifter in place on here. You need to drop it out, loosen the 610 mil hex bolts, and then pop that thing off. Then the transmission can come rearward, but there really is a dance between this section of the case and the cross member here. Miraculously, as we slid this transmission in, all of the spacers and the slave cylinder lined right back up again and popped into their homes. Everything is on the pin, it's aligned and tight, and I'm very pleased with that. We did have to drop the parking brake cable out again, which is super easy. I've already had this all apart, and this is well lubricated, so the 1/2-inch nut here on the adjustment stud over on the passenger side comes off to the point that you can slide that out of the frame. This ball pops out and the whole cable comes down. Alan's got the driveline back in. I think I mentioned when I first installed this, the yoke was strangely tight back here. I think it's actually the splines on the inside, not in the bushing at all, because as you can see, it spins in the bushing really nice. As we've worked this in and out a couple times, it's getting freer and freer, so hopefully everything's fine there. Here's the speedo cable in place. Again, it does sneak out of this gap between the Silver Sport crossmember and the torsion bar crossmember here. We've got it passed through there and then up into the factory holder for the speedometer cable right here above the torsion bar. Hopefully this will keep this away from the exhaust. It's probably gonna need a blanket anyway. With the transmission all settled, we've moved on to the exhaust kit. This is a TTI system that connects to their headers. If you don't know anything about A-body headers, you really wanna get actually decent ones. That pretty much means either TTI, like we've got here, or Doug's. Everything else is terrible. TTI makes this nice complete exhaust kit for the car. We are having to modify it a little bit to get the mufflers to sit in the right location and get the tailpipe sections around the Dana 60 axle. It's really nice stuff, but obviously there's some variance between different cars. Being a Dart Sport, this car is on the Plymouth wheelbase. We're having to cut these center pipes by a few inches to get everything to line up. I'm pretty sure that's because this is designed to fit onto a longer wheelbase Dodge. Trimming the system exactly 3 inches at the back of these pipes, so the mufflers would move rearward slightly, solved the fitment issue. The next issue is these brackets are supposed to come off of the seatbelt bolts, but apparently in 74, when they went to the retracting seatbelt system, yes, these even have retracting rear belts, they moved the receiver mounts down here, so the bracket is nowhere near that. Now we had to drill some holes in the floor, roughly in the area of the previous seatbelt bolt location, and we're going to use some 7/16 bolts, some big fender washers, and lock nuts to hold all this together. I've had to climb up in here several times today. It's not really fun. Sure. We put the fender washers on both sides of the body sheet metal. Essentially that backs it up and strengthens it. Generally speaking, hanging your exhaust off of just sheet metal, probably not the greatest of ideas. Welding a reinforcing plate on here like the ones on the seatbelts would have been nice, but I think this will do just fine. One forever later, we've got an exhaust system. Okay, I do still need to tighten down the bolts on these isolators here. They're just hanging loose. And that'll bring this tip over just a hair. But this is looking pretty good. You can see here how it's carefully and artfully bent around the leaf spring. If this suspension were to collapse all the way, well, the leaf would be really close here. Of course, we did a leaf relocation on this car, and they are, what, 1/2 inch further in than they should be? So we definitely can't fault TTI for that. I think it's going to be good, but we'll see where the ride height ends up. We might have to tweak it that way a little bit. You'll notice this system just has turn downs, no fancy shiny tips. Because sleeper. I can't install these now because I need the car either on the ground or more ideally on a drive-on lift. You really don't want to install subframe connectors while the body is stressed in a way different from how it normally sits on its wheels. But I did decide to test fit these Hotchkiss subframe connectors. I see how they work now. Pretty simple. Very similar to what's on Dale's Demon. These are not the type that are form-fitted to the floor and end up fully welded there. They just sit underneath the floor. Nice and simple. They get welded at the back, welded at the front. There's a little separate bracket piece that kind of sits against the front frame rail and wraps underneath it. Weld all of that, spritz some paint on the not painted part, strip the parts on the bar itself where the welding has to be done. Can't be too difficult. This was the main parts pile, and it is empty. There are a few leftover bits here. That is a set of torque boxes. We'll be doing those at the same time as the subframe connectors. That's the Hurst cross member that we modified and still didn't work. And then these are some various fluids I need to put in. Also a gas cap. We do have this box of aftermarket gauges to contend with. And there's some MSD bits in here. Oh, I need that. Buttoning up some other things while I've got it up on the lift. I did finally pin all of the tie rod ends. I think I was missing 4 cotter pins. That's done. Sleeves are still loose. We're going to have to eyeball the toe after we eyeball the camber. I'm not there yet. Did tighten up the through bolt on the idler arm. That was totally loose. Now I'm looking at brake stuff. We still have the original front right brake line and the original rear brake line. If this car was rustier and crappier, we'd probably be putting all new lines on it, but it's from California and it's in really good shape. So we're just going to reuse those lines. We'll have to use an extension for the line going to the rear because we no longer have a splitter block down here on the frame rail. All of that happens up at the master cylinder. Here's the end of the front right brake line. We are going to be retaining this. We just have to bend it up to meet that block under the master cylinder, and it'll probably end up shortened and reflared. We'll see what all that looks like though. I got rid of the front left brake line because it was super short going to the original valve right here, and I didn't think it would be of any use for our purposes. It turns out you totally can tee together your original lines down here on the frame and then run an extension up to the combination valve. I would have done that if I knew, but anyway, I guess now I'm going to make a new front left line and it's going to go all the way up to the valve. To do that, I'll be using this really nice 3/16 NiCop line. That's nickel copper alloy. It's super easy to bend. It cannot rust. This is great stuff. Note, I've got a bend there. That's to leave a straight section to put my flare nut on. Then it turns 180 degrees and dips down under the frame rail just like the factory one did. I don't yet know how tall it needs to be, so we'll have to do some measuring before I cut this. I'd hate to waste this line. I can't actually finish this right now because someone borrowed my flare kit. So I guess I'll get back to brake lines later. Fluids. Silver Sport supplied all of this mess. This is their preferred fluid. Dextron, Merc, whatever, regular ATF is also acceptable. They said to use the cheap stuff for the brake-in. That's what we're going to do. They gave us this fancy Redline .4 brake fluid for the hydraulic clutch system. You can totally see why they ship this stuff in bags. Probably could have filled the transmission while it was out of the car. Didn't do that. Now I get to do it the fun way with a pump. This thing should take about 3 quarts. Somehow managed to get all of those 3 quarts pumped in there without making a horrible mess. It is filled just to the bottom of this hole. Now I don't have gear oil for the rear axle, which is slightly inconvenient and annoying. This is a helical type Eaton True Track. Apparently these just use a regular 80/90 gear oil and no friction modifiers whatsoever. I'm also short banjo bolts for the rear brakes. I don't know if we did get these from Dr. Diff and I misplaced them or if we never had them, but I need to come up with those. These, of course, are essentially Ford Explorer rear brake assemblies. They've got the little disc caliper pad set up, and then there's also a parking brake inside here. Oh, I did get the sending unit put in the tank before we stuck this exhaust in the way. I need to get a chunk of hose put on there with some fresh clamps, and then I will connect the ground strap. With any luck, we will have a working fuel gauge in this car. It's the next day, and Alan has filled the differential, which you can tell by the way there's fluid leaking on the ground. We finally got banjo bolts for the rear calipers. Turns out these are 3/8 24 fine thread. It is American thread, even though these brakes are from a late 90s, early 2000s Explorer. Alan's currently replacing the frame fuel lines. We've got a new piece of rubber here going from the frame to the mechanical pump. This is the good Gates Barricade stuff. It's supposed to hold up to ethanol and not totally deteriorate like the cheaper hoses do. Look at that, fuel hose is in place, ground strap is connected, and I also took the liberty of capping this return line at both ends. Originally, this line would have connected to the vapor canister. Allegedly, we don't have one of those anymore. I'm gonna leave it in place instead of removing it totally. We may wanna add a vapor return line at some point using one of those 3 hose filters. I'm not gonna do that right now, but I wanna keep the option open. Everyone hated the look of this bypass hose in the last video. That includes me. I've never been super excited about it. The problem is we're joining an LA water pump to a Magnum type intake. On the Magnum, the bypass hose goes straight forward. On the LA, it comes over here, and it should come out of the intake at an angle to match. Now, it was kind of sort of kinked. Today, I loosened the clamps, unkinked it a little bit, and then I hit it with some heat. And that did help to relax it. It's still a little funky looking, but in no way is this like kinked or closed off or anything like that. So I think I'm just gonna leave it. I also gave the heater hoses the same treatment to try and get these 90-degree bends looking a little bit better. We've still got some things missing. I ordered an upper radiator hose and I ordered a power steering pressure line. It's weeks later for some reason, and all kinds of things have happened which we did not bother pointing a camera at. Alan finalized our brake line situation. This one, which I think I had shown you a preliminary version of, has been completed. It's connected to the valve up underneath the master cylinder, and it doesn't even seem to leak. And I know that because he's currently bleeding the brakes and things are going pretty well. You can just barely see the extension piece and union for the rear brake connection up there.
Never mentioned I'm scared of height.
Hey Osha, is this safe? As you can tell by these puddles on the floor, we've got fluid to both of the rear brakes now. In theory, this thing probably would stop. That is brakes. Nice. With the car back on the ground, we can take a look at the rest of this plumbing stuff. This is the line for the rear brakes. You can see it goes down there and connects. It just loops up here to this front connection. The other one kind of snakes back there over the slave cylinder into a clip on the firewall, then comes up this way to that connection on this side of the block. I've got the new speedometer cable run into the firewall. It's not connected to the dash yet. We have a bit of an issue here because somebody put a brake booster right in the way, and somebody put a clutch master cylinder even more in the way. I don't know if this is just going to have to live above it, or if I'm going to be able to like bend it through these two things. Maybe like that, maybe, but I don't really like the look of it. And I think it needs to be inside this brake line, so I've got to fish it back out now. This area ended up very crowded on this car. You see I've got the grubby washer fluid tank set in place. That was to make sure brake lines and such didn't hit that. I said I ordered an upper radiator hose. That was for a Durango. Well, the Durango hose didn't show up. It was not actually available. I could have gotten it from O'Reilly, but it cost like $50. So I started looking for other options. Typically, to find a hose for a custom application, I'll take a piece of mechanics wire, I'll bend it into the shape I want, and then take that to the part store and compare it to all the hoses hanging on the wall. Well, I did that for this, and this hose looked almost exactly right. Although my mechanics wire thing had more of a 90-degree bend here, that's fine. This doesn't hit anything. The heater hose is bent over that way, so this one fits great. I did have to lop like 3 or 4 inches off the end here, but no problem. I didn't order a factory hose because I knew this radiator is bigger than it was supposed to be, and I didn't figure this connection was going to line up right. When I got this hose home, I decided to verify what it fits so I know for the future. Yeah, it turns out I randomly picked the correct part number for the factory hose off of the wall. So that was a waste of time. I haven't permanently installed the thermostat and housing yet. I'm going to do that after I pre-fill the radiator and block. I'll get coolant up to almost this level before I seal that off and then brim it. That'll be the easiest way to do that. Typically I'll take a heater hose off or something, but all of those connections are already done. I did also get power steering hoses. This is the pressure line. I ordered this for a 1970 Dart because it looked kind of sort of correct. The issue is the 70 Dart didn't use a Saginaw box like this thing has, so the bends are a little bit different on this end, but I can make that work. It just needs a little bit of tweaking. I actually need to tweak the box end even more, and we do have an issue with the threads here. This needs a small fitting, and the one in this box is currently a larger one. Strike that, reverse it. I need the larger one, and I have the smaller one. No matter, I pulled this off of a spare core box in the shed, and we'll swap that in there. I also got a length of the special correct power steering return hose. With those things done, I can get fluid in that system and put the belt back on, and then we're all done with accessory stuff. I haven't gotten the cooling fans wired yet. I received the kit from Cold Case to connect to both of those. We get a nice temperature probe thing here and a heavy-duty relay. One problem, there's nowhere to put this on our intake manifold. Because we're using an aftermarket temperature gauge, what I'm going to do is delete the factory temp sender, and then I'm going to have to drill and tap this to the larger pipe thread size to fit this probe. I considered just adding an extra hole, but there doesn't seem to be anywhere suitable to do that. I do wish I'd known that was coming before I fully installed this intake on the car, but you know, it is what it is. I still need to mount the blaster coil. Everyone and their mother commented on the last video about that and said to get nut certs. I am familiar with those. I don't know where I can buy them locally, but I need to figure that out. We'll put a few of those in the firewall here and then bolt those rubber isolating pads down. This will go over the pads and then 3 screws will hold it to those. Today is a new day. Yet another day. Hopefully today is the day we're going to move this car under its own power. But before that happens, I still have to do like all of those things I said. And then whatever the other things are that I'm not remembering right now. Ooh, longer battery cable that doesn't sit on a header. And a wire to trigger the starter. Those would be good things to remember. I did get the power steering pressure line in. I had to bend it a little bit at this end and at this end, as I said, and I changed that fitting out. But this looks really nice. I'm going to do the return line next, but it's going to be very close to this header pipe, so I think I'm going to get some heat wrap for it. It's a little while later, and our fan switch is mounted. To do this, I used a drill bit that was ever so slightly too small and a 3/8 pipe tap. I somehow managed to get the depth exactly right. I also managed to keep most of the aluminum shavings out of the intake by using some grease on the drill bit and going very slow, and then using some grease on the pipe tap as well. Not exactly 100% there. It did require some vacuuming and picking of little bits left behind, but I got it. I'm filling the cooling system, and so far it's going well, except for one little drip from this lower radiator hose at the radiator. I just had to reef that clamp down, and I think it's fixed now. Now, as always, I'm filling the cooling system by slowly pouring antifreeze coolant mixture into the radiator and watching an open spot on the engine. In this case, it's the thermostat. We have no thermostat in yet at all. So I'm going to slowly pour in this 3rd gallon and watch for the coolant level to come up. We'll get it close to the thermostat, and then I will install that thing. Final install the upper hose, brim it, and we're good. Most of these systems have a 2.5 to 3 gallon capacity, but this cold case radiator is humongous. I've got 3 gallons in and we're still not to the intake. 3.5 gallons in and we're finally to here. Time to install the thermostat. I get asked pretty frequently in the comments, Jamie, why don't you just drill a hole in your thermostats to aid in burping the cooling system? Well, I don't know. I don't want to. My method works. I always do it this way, and in any case, no matter what kind of thermostat we've got in there, hole or otherwise, it'll work just fine. I'm not going to open up every thermostat housing in the universe to drill one hole to make this easier. I'll just pop a hose off. No big deal. Thermostat, gasket, and housing are in. Bolts are tight. We'll give the silicone a minute to set up before we brim the cooling system, but I will install the hose now. Through the magic of gravity, via leaving the bleeder screw for the clutch open and pouring in some DOT4 brake fluid and pumping the pedal like 137 times, we now basically have a clutch. There's a little air left in there, but we're getting somewhere. Hopefully this is enough travel. I may have to extend that push rod, which is going to raise the clutch pedal up higher than the brake, and that would be unfortunate. We're going down. We've got lug nuts tight. We did tighten the tie rod sleeves, although again, it needs an alignment, so all of that will be messed with more in the future. Clip the torsion bars. I think all the important underneath stuff is done. So we're going to put this thing on the ground for real, install the steering column, and then, I don't know, do more stuff. I've returned from a coffee run to find the steering column installed. Very nice. Hey, we should probably bolt the shifter handle on too. We do still need to come up with a cover to go around the shifter here on the floor, but that is not a right now problem. Look at all of these controls. We've got a steering wheel. Alan did knock the column shifter off of the column. We don't need that for our purposes. We're going to have to mess with this collar, though, because it needs to stay in the park position for the key to come out. Had to flip the clutch line up above the lever thing that used to go to the column shift linkage. Now it's in the park position, and it should stay there. Obviously, it would be great to get rid of that shifter section and have a nice, clean floor shift style column. Those are kind of hard to come by. At least for a B body, you can buy the collars to convert it. Maybe those are available for these cars too, I'm not sure. For now, we're just gonna leave it like this. It's perfectly functional. But again, with no shifter, you need to make sure this is up in the park position all the time, or you won't be able to get your key out. This is a big improvement over not moving at all. I do notice the action to get into 5th gear is like not much. Here's 3rd. Here's 5th. 3rd, 5th. It just like barely goes in there. Other than that, it feels great. The one driver control we don't have yet is a working throttle pedal, so that's going to be my next fun adventure. We've got a return line, and it's wrapped in that high temp stuff. I'll probably put a zip tie here to keep that from moving. We've got a power steering belt again. We've got some power steering fluid. Not quite enough though. And I tightened this thing up. Because those bolts were loose for the power steering bracket, we did actually lose some coolant. Those long through bolts go through the water pump and the timing cover into water in the block. And so this is pretty typical. Often when you're changing belts and you loosen those hold down bolts, you'll lose a little dribble as well. So much of putting a car together like this is thinking, all right, one more thing. All I got to do is this one thing, and then it's time to start it. But after that one thing, there's always another one thing. And that continues like forever. I thought, okay, all I got to do is finish up the battery cables and the starter trigger wire, which I've now done, and then we're ready to start. Well, no, because there's no neutral safety set up on this at all right now. There's a neutral switch on this transmission that I'm going to connect to the starter relay, but I haven't done that. So if I were to turn the key right now, it wouldn't do anything. I've got the wiring figured out for the cooling fan relay setup, but it's not actually done. I still need to connect the power feed through this fancy fuse holder. I've got the trigger wire, which is white, run over toward this switch thingy, but it's not terminated at all. And the key wire is this blue one. It's also snipped, and it's going to be connected to one of these unused wires in the harness, but it's not done yet either. The very first Dead Dodge Garage video ever was about wiring my Power Wagon, and the main point of the video was explaining relays, how to wire them and why they're so great. I don't recommend you go watch that video. My early videos were terrible. I'm just saying. I also did a headlight relay conversion video quite some time ago where I discussed this same thing, but essentially you've got power in from the battery, power out to your accessory, a power trigger, and a ground trigger. You can use either of these to trigger the relay. This one's going to be triggered by ground through that temp switch, so it'll just have key power at all times when the key is on, of course. Here's a slightly obscured look down towards the new starter wire setup. You can see the big red power wire coming from the battery, and then the blue with white tracers, the trigger coming from the relay. Still need to kind of tidy this stuff up. You can see that high temp shield that's wrapping it there. It goes past that header tube, so I don't want that wiring melted. It is in the factory holder bracket as well. I still don't have a working throttle. There's one more thing that needs to happen. Note, this is a factory slant 6 throttle cable. That's why it's 1 billion miles long. The factory small block holder sits right here on these 2 bolts at the back of the intake. If we end up using one of those, which we may, this cable is going to end up kind of curly-cued back behind the engine, which is hard to do with one hand. It'll sit kind of like that. Note that extra cable ends up bunched up behind the head. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it does work. We've done this many times in the past. The other option would be to come up with some kind of bracket that mounts off the carburetor and put this casing kind of here. Even so, it's still sort of long, but it would be a bit tidier. I'm actually leaning toward that aftermarket type setup because this is a Magnum swap. Magnums have the intake bolts running straight up and down, while LAs have them coming into the head at an angle. The LA uses a throttle hold down bracket that looks like this. This sits right here on the intake, and you can see the pedestal there that the cable would mount on. That would go on these 2 bolts back here. Obviously for the stick application, we'd be taking off that bit of kickdown linkage. If we were to try to put this on the Magnum, it would end up at a silly angle like this. So I might bend this one so that those tabs are at a 90-degree angle and it sits straight up. Even if I do that, I don't know that this is going to be ideal. Partially because of that throttle cable issue I discussed, partially because of our taller aftermarket intake. If I put the cable in the factory-ish location with that bracket, it's going to be down here, and the cable is going to have to come up at an angle. You can buy a throttle bracket that mounts off of one of the carb bolts, but the generic ones that the parts store have don't have a clamp for our Chrysler type cable. They have a square hole for GM stuff, because of course they do. So I don't quite know how I'm going to solve this problem just yet. Speaking of problems, this is the power steering pump we mounted on the Magnum engine. Notice the drip. It's not ideal. Now this had a remanufactured stamping on the housing. You can see from down here it does look a little greasy and slightly scraped, but I kind of thought that was just from rolling around in a box for a long time. At this point, I don't actually know if this is a fresh rebuilt part or not. What I do know is that the housing O-ring is bad, and all of the shiny new fluid I put in there is slowly leaking out. Ah yes, and I need to reef down the lower radiator hose clamp on the other side as well. Just for the record, this is not loose. It's pretty tight already. I really thought we were driving this thing today, but yeah, I guess not. It's days later. Again. And I'm chipping away at the Dart Sport, so I wanted to show you what I've gotten figured out. Small thing, but I did put on some plug wire separators. They're not my favorite style, but they do keep the plug wires separated, somewhat organized, so I guess there's that. As a general rule, you want to keep your plug wires from crossing over each other, and you also want to try and keep them from touching each other, and also metal parts of your engine, if at all possible. They artfully dodged the brake booster over here, but at some point I think we're going to have to add a second breather or PCV valve there. That'll kind of complicate things. I have solved the throttle hold down conundrum. This is a truck piece. Instead of mounting on those rear tube bolts like an A-body or B-body bracket does, it mounts up here. That moves this connection point for the cable further forward, and it's also taller. I did bend it so that it's sitting up like this, coming off of those Magnum vertical intake bolts, and it works out almost perfectly. Note the return spring is totally temporary. That's just a random spring. I was having some issues with the throttle not wanting to return at all, even with that spring stretched pretty tight. This was the throttle cable being all gummy. I sprayed some PB in there and worked it back and forth a bunch, and now it works fine. I'm still not done with wiring, but I have made a lot of progress. For one thing, I've got my battery cable situation wrapped up here, so it kind of sort of looks like an original. Not exactly, but I don't know, I kind of like it. It's relatively tidy. The starter relay trigger wire comes in right here next to that main supply wire that's coming straight from battery positive, and then this is the longer one I put in for the starter. It goes down here, wrapped up with that trigger wire, through that coating down there and through the bracket to the starter. I used a heat shrink butt splice to connect the feed wire for the relay to our fuse holder here. There's a 40 amp fuse in here that runs the fans. I've got the fan relay control wiring tied into the harness right through here. There's another heat shrink butt splice here connecting it to that one ignition trigger wire I showed earlier. These are going to be the two I combined for the MSD, so I've got my tape up to here. I need to make that connection and then run these other wires over to the engine. I've yet to start on the wiring for the aftermarket gauges. We're gonna have a triple pod under the dash and a tachometer. I'm gonna do all of that stuff in its own separate harness just to keep things simple. Ignition wiring is finished. That's the wire for the tach. The wire for the factory oil light, which we are gonna try and get working, is over here. Yes, they're both gray. No, I probably won't get them mixed up. The red trigger wire there, you can see tied into the harness back in there where it's spliced together with those blue and brown wires. I did nicely wrap all of the wiring for the MSD together, and it's in two little rubberized wiring holders now. I still need to get the unit itself screwed down. I also wrapped the battery wires. Seemed like a nice thing to do. Maybe I'll put these in a holder too. There's the fan switch trigger wire terminated, and here is a choke wire. That's just a regular blue ignition feed as well. I would like to get a plastic piece on that, but that may make it so the spade doesn't fit all the way down. Maybe I'll just heat shrink it or something. I still need to join the fan output wire to both of these fan feed wires somehow. I'll figure that out later. And then get the MSD components mounted, and the engine electrical is done. Again, aside from those gauges. Oh, and an alternator charge output wire. It's a new day again for some reason. Don't ask why, just get used to it. Anyway, I'm filling the fuel tank right now. The easy way, of course. I promise that's brand new clean fuel. This is just what this hose looks like now. There's less and less wiring mess to contend with all the time. I just finished the fan stuff. I've got the power wire spliced in two places in here using a clever technique. And those are heat shrunk and then taped up for tidiness. You see this big 6-gauge red cable? This is our charge output. The factory passes this wire that way up over the valve cover so it can go into the firewall connector. We're not doing that at all with this thing. This is a high output tough stuff alternator. I don't remember. It's self-regulated. We don't have the factory wiring here to contend with either. And we needed a big heavy-duty cable that could take all the charge this alternator puts out. So I got this 6-gauge wire, and instead of trying to weave it that same direction, I just passed it this way. It's tied in nicely with the MSD wiring there, and it's in all of the factory clips going across the radiator support. It comes through this hole right here, and as you can see, it's cut right in this neighborhood. I searched high and low all over town for a heavy-duty fuse holder to use for this charging circuit that was not the cheesy aftermarket stereo plasticky flavor. Unfortunately, I couldn't really come up with anything. I could have ordered something online and waited, but I didn't really want to do that either. So I bought one of these MIDI fuse holders. A MIDI fuse looks like this. Notice this one's rated for 100 amp. That should be plenty to handle the charge circuit in this thing. The fuse gets hooked onto these two screws on the two halves. I've got it assembled on the cables already. And then the plastic case goes together over that. There's also a holder thing that I'll have to screw down here. Those might be some of the only holes I have to drill in this entire car aside from mounting the radiator. I would have liked something just a bit cleaner. A bit less baby's first subwoofer kit, but it is what it is. It'll do the job fine. If you watch my videos often, then you know they're never like a beginner's level guide. I never give you the step-by-step, play-by-play, every little nut and bolt detail of how to do any project. I do try to include useful information wherever possible, but I don't know. I feel like in this one in particular, that's just kind of not happening because I'm so focused on doing this actual build. Well, here's a new one for me that maybe I can teach you about at the same time. Threaded insert rivets, or riv nuts. See, I've got these little magic feet to mount our Blaster 2 coil to the firewall. Did I call this coil a Blaster 2? It's a Blaster SS. I cannot get a tool behind that area to put a nut on here. So what I'm gonna do is put threaded inserts into the firewall in the 3 positions for those feet. This is very much like a riveting tool. The difference is the inside is threaded. It's actually threaded in 2 places. So you're gonna have the piece that goes in the center there and holds your insert, and there's a collar that goes the other way. There's the stud piece that the insert is going to thread onto. This is actually reverse threaded, which kind of makes sense. This is the outer nut. This threads into the body like that and holds this piece centered. I guess I need more hands to do that. And then the insert will go here. Basically what happens here is you squeeze the pliers is the shoulder of that insert is going to press against that sleeve while the threaded centerpiece pulls on the inside of the insert. This is going to have the effect of folding the two towards each other. There in that shoulder where it's relieved, it's going to collapse. Now the instructions, which I didn't see at first but thankfully did not throw away, list the drill sizes for each of these inserts. The smaller two, one of which I'm using, number 8 I think, require 9/32, which I actually have, but only because I bought new bits recently. All right, there are 3 more holes I had to drill, but I swear I'm just about done with that. Also, let it be noted, there's insulation behind this that I could have removed to get to the backside, but I'm not doing that. With the holes drilled, it's time to pop this in there and squeeze. Okay, that was actually really easy. Like easier than normal riveting even. All 3 inserts are done, the rubber feet are screwed in there, and I am questioning how on earth I made it this far without ever using these things. What a great tool. Done! Very nice. Coil wire. I slightly forgot that we had to buy this one separately to match up with that Fancy Blaster SS coil. And I didn't see it when I was first setting the ignition up, so I had a temporary wire in here. This was helpful because it was long enough to set the coil up there on the cowl as well. Anyway, I've got the actual correct wire now. I even swapped this boot for the distributor cap side over from the coil that came in this kit, so we can use the fancy MSD wire hold down thingy. MSD box mounted. Overflow tank reinstalled and connected to the new radiator. Now I did have to space this somewhat to make room around the fan shroud, and the fan wiring ended up passing inside of it there, but I feel pretty good about it. That is in a big rubberized coating, so we don't have to worry about it rubbing through or anything. I did space it up somewhat on this side with some washers to get room around that shroud. I could have started beating the shroud with a hammer, but I don't want to do that. Just about every single component of the cooling system so far has leaked. Thermostat, even though I carefully modified this gasket to fit with the housing and double siliconed it, it was tight, but it wasn't tight. That clamp leaked. That clamp leaked. Again, these were all tight. That one leaked. That one might still be leaking, even though I've reefed it twice now. Oh, this guy's good. Okay, I haven't seen any coolant streaming down the firewall yet. I did change out that one stretched spring for a doubled throttle return spring. It came with a cheesy little bracket, but I couldn't find anywhere to mount it on the manifold. So I just hooked them on this, and that seems pretty good. Feels nice on the pedal there. I think we're there. I think all of the important stuff is done, except for one thing. And it's this stupid power steering pump. I'm gonna have to take this thingy off and pull the pulley back off with a special tool, move the studs over to the new pump I've got sitting in a box here, press the pulley back on, and then reinstall it and fill it with fluid again. Oh, this sure was easier to mess with before someone finished the car and put all these things in the way. Good news, pump is out. Dumb news, new pump is different. This is the earlier type with a threaded shaft. The pulley sits down on here and then a nut retains it. I don't have that type of pulley. I have the press-on pulley. So, I'm screwed. Again. Either I'll find the right year pump that comes with the press-style pulley, or I'll find the right pulley for this pump. But this is not a problem I can solve right now. It's not a problem I can solve tonight. And I'm getting pretty tired of not hearing this thing run. Here's the other thing about steering. We can't really do that right now. The way the alignment is set, this front left tire is hitting the front corner of this fender really, really bad. It actually might also have something to do with the fact that it's kind of smashed. The front right tire doesn't hit at all, although that may be a different story when you're going over bumps and such. So with all of that said, I'm gonna move Dale's Demon out of the way, and we'll see if the Dart Sport wants to fire up for real, on its own key switch, its own fuel tank, and going through that shiny TTI exhaust system. 3 more things. Thing 1, the column's not plugged in. I knew that. I can do that quickly. Now it makes horrible buzzing noises. Thing 2, I forgot I had to cut this wire when I took the column out, so I'm going to have to splice that somehow. I'm sure this is obvious. God, that's a horrible noise. Thank you. This is going to require some kind of permanent fix at some point, but I think for now we'll just kind of wing it. Listen, fixed is fixed. I'm kidding. You can tell I'm kidding, right? This is going to get fixed nicely later. We're probably going to have to do a bunch with the wiring in the dash of this thing, actually. Like, delete this stupid box, for example. Thing the third, I haven't wired up that neutral position switch on the transmission to the starter relay yet, so we don't have anything grounding it out. I added a temporary wire right here. I'm sure that'll be fine. And I'll definitely remember to fix it later. Now I'm filling the bowls on the carburetor with some chooch juice and getting it all over everywhere, including my phone for some reason. Now remember, this thing is fully untuned. These systems are as they were installed, as they came out of the boxes. I eyeballed the timing. It was close enough to fire off and run for a few seconds in the last video, so hopefully it'll fire off again and run for more than a few seconds, and hopefully not puke fuel everywhere from the dual feed Holley setup, although let's be honest, it's gonna leak. Remember also, this is a Magnum-based engine, so we don't have to worry about a cam break-in or anything like that. I'm just gonna fire it up, and we'll see what it do. You watch for leaks. That was weird. All right, leak check. It sounds pretty good, guys. It sounds pretty good. Why couldn't I have caught that on video? Anyway, for whatever reason, the front needle and seat failed. This bowl overflowed, and we got the happy little geyser of gas out the top. I've got the hold down screw and the adjusting nut for the front needle and seat off now. You can see that thing sticking out of there, maybe 4 or 5 threads. I usually put them about 3 threads out, so a position more like, I guess like that. But why is this thing sticking? Why are we getting a gas geyser? I don't know. Let's take it out and look. One of the nice things about Holleys is that this is relatively easy to do. One of the not so nice things about Holleys, these O-rings. This is a common problem, although I wouldn't expect to see it here since this thing is brand new. It's never had gas on it. Why is there a hair in there? I don't think that's the problem, but still, I don't see anything wrong with this at all. I don't see any debris. The O-ring's good. This is moving freely. I have had issues like this with needles and seats before where they look perfectly clean and functional, but do this. Hold the phone. This is not a needle and seat problem. I don't know if you can even see through that window. That brass float is stuck in the downward position. It should be up right now because that bowl is full of fuel, kind of like this one. Of course, the one time the dual feed line does not leak, I have to take it apart and pull a bowl. Lovely. I was trying to have this done right now. It's a new day and we're huffing gas again. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I hate Holleys. I hate them. Anyway, draining the bowl, which was massively overfilled, of course, made a giant gasoline swimming pool in the air gap manifold, so that was nice. It also covered every other surface around here. Actual Holleys don't come with reusable bowl gaskets. I don't know about QFT, but I'm not seeing any blue in there, so I might have to dig one of those up as well. It's fine. It's just brand new. All right, at least there's that. They do use the blue gaskets and the bowl came right off. Now can I sneak it past this? Yay. No! There's more gas in there. And yeah, the float's very much stuck. How much gas is in you? Seriously, it's just bleeding everywhere. And why is there dirty stuff in here? Almost 100% of this fuel system is brand new. Well, except the main line. Float. Moving. Not moving. Why is that? You may have noticed this float's slightly deformed. It's actually shaped like this to go around the power valve in the middle, I think, but the bottom of this thing is crushed. I don't know if this is a difference in temperature or air pressure from where it was built to here, but it's clearly rubbing inside the body of this bowl. It's very easy to see along the back side here. It's concave, it's curved toward the pin there. Yeah, that ain't good. There are your witness marks on both sides of the bowl. I don't know if the inside of a typical Holley bowl looks just like this. This is a special QFT part. It's the same basic design, but I've never had this issue before. All right, here's the inside of a Holley bowl, and yeah, it's pretty much the same. This one's also got the nitrofill floats. That's why it's such a great candidate for boost. Unlike those brass ones, these don't collapse or deform and rub on the case or fill with gasoline. They're kind of better to have, but QFT wanted the brass for some reason. All I did is reshape the float with my hands, and it now works properly. Yay! I've got the needle and seat assembly screwed back in now. Note, I've got about 3 threads showing on the top of the bowl there. I've found that to be the correct setting in almost all cases. See, these blue gaskets are nice. Instead of being glued on there and deteriorating and having to be scraped off painstakingly by hand in a really obnoxious operation, things just pop apart and then you can pop them back together again. There is a lot to be said for the QFT version of the Holley. It's very tunable and they tend to be a bit cheaper, but I don't know, I'm kind of finding the quality lacking here. Look at this booster. It doesn't actually fit this main body correctly at all. I guess these metering plates are billet aluminum. You can see the machining marks there. That's cool, I guess. I'm hoping to not have to do much tuning with this thing, particularly because I'm going to fill the intake with gas every time I have to pull this plate out. Currently, it's got a 6.5 power valve. That's pretty standard. And we've got 74 main jets. And now we're back where we were like 2 days ago. So let's fire this thing up again and pray for no geysers. Big money! Why? This key switch is messed up, by the way. Yeah, if you turn it too far, it stops cranking. Stop buzzing. There's plenty of fuel. Float's moving. Did I just flood the crap out of it? That would be hilarious. Yeah, I reefed the crap out of this, but it's still seeping. This is the way. Should there be a light? Does it just blink? The MSD light was sometimes blinking and sometimes not. That's fixed. That's leaking. These lines use flare fittings just like brake lines. I don't know why, they just always leak. Well, okay, that one wasn't reefed hard enough. There you go. So far, it doesn't want to idle at all. Remember, I haven't checked the timing or done a single thing. So I gave the distributor a random advance bump, and I did back out all 4 idle screws from a half turn out from bottomed to 3/4 turn. We'll see if that helps. Still starts easily, so I don't think that's too much timing yet. There we go. All right, we're getting somewhere, kind of. I gave the idle speed a bump. The choke's already warm enough to be fully open. Not sure what that whistling is. Huh. This thing sounds angry. Let's see what this does, if anything. Okay. Okay. All right, we're close. It might want some more timing, though. That's a very annoying noise. I don't know where it's coming from. Huh. Is this still wet? Yes. Hey. Nice shirt. All right, moment of truth. Let's see if we're any good at installing TKXs. First time moving under its own power with the shiny new drivetrain. See if anything falls off. That was cool. Hey, so the ignition switch is bad. And if you turn it a little too far, sometimes it doesn't crank, but it also doesn't put out power to the ignition. So, put ignition switch on the list. locked on. Nice. We're not actually circulating through the radiator yet, so the temperature set on the fan must be slightly lower than this thermostat. That or there's a small air bubble trapped in there keeping it from opening. It'll open shortly, I'm sure. I haven't checked voltage on the system yet, but I know it's charging. You can tell that by the way the fans kick up when the engine revs. My imager only shows about 160 degrees in that crossover. This should be a 185 thermostat, I believe. So we're definitely safe. I still don't know what this weird whistly, screechy sound is. I suspect it's in the alternator though. It's definitely coming from that side. This booster and master setup does the happy dance a lot more than I'd like. I'm a little worried about that because of our soft brake line material. This Nycop stuff is super nice to work with, but I'm afraid it might be able to rub through, like on these clips I've got it going through. I'm thinking some sections of rubber over that, anywhere it's touching the body, and then maybe even a brace coming out to this master. That thing's dancing around way more than the engine is. Thermostat just opened at 195. So I guess I put a 195 in there. Having it a few degrees lower might be a fine idea, but not much lower. You know, 180, that would be the lowest I'd go. I think we'll probably leave this for now. No, we don't have low oil pressure. The oil light wire is hitting ground. We're gonna pull it back into the shop for now. We'll let it cool off and check systems. What a huge success. Need to get the tires clearing the fenders and get some power steering on here, and we could drive it for real. And that lower hose connection is still leaking. I've tightened it like 3 times. I do not understand. I've got the fans cooling down the radiator a little bit here. Yeah, they work pretty well. There are some various interesting hot smells. Obviously, we had our greasy fingers all over that exhaust system. All kinds of things are heating up that have never heated up before, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to keep an eye out for leaks and stuff. I'm sure you'll have noticed this thing's smoking a little bit. Part of that is burning crap off the inside of the exhaust, but also this is a brand new engine. A great thing to do right now would be to just get it out and drive it. Get some miles on it and try and cutting these rings. Unfortunately, again, we can't quite do that yet. It's hours later, the engine's cooled down, and I'm chasing leaks. I found one here with a pressure check. It's actually coming out around that left lower water pump bolt. Now these do go into water, but that bolt is very tight and I very rarely have leakage like this. It could also be coming out around the water pump into the bolt area, but that would be really silly. I guess I'll be pulling that one out and doing some thread sealant. Sometimes leaks like these seal themselves up after a little bit of runtime, so maybe that'll happen, but also maybe not. I had another leak from one of the bypass hose clamps, even though I've tightened them 4 times. I did have a leak down the firewall here, even though I've tightened these twice. We're good now. When I first pressurized it, I could hear a little drip, and if I touched this, it made cool fizzling sounds. If you're building a car with like all new parts and you're thinking, oh, it's great, nothing's gonna leak. Yeah, that's not how it works, guy. Now I know I mentioned the tire rubbing on this driver fender. This thing has had a little bit of an incident here. I am probably going to try and get this dent popped out at some point. Anyway, there is a support brace that comes from the frame, or maybe it's the bumper bracket, out to the fender and kind of backs it up a little bit, keeps this section from moving. I just unbolted that, and as soon as I did, the bottom of this fender jumped out like 1/2 inch. I can actually pull it out even farther than that. And I might actually modify this to extend the fender out ever so slightly for extra tire clearance. But even with the thing just loose, I'll bet you this tire can now turn past this. Now, even so, I'm probably going to have to clearance the trim and the corner of the fender here, either with a hammer or some cutting, and get them moved inward a bit. I'm also going to end up rolling it up here and maybe doing some light cutting. As you can see, we're really close to good. And actually, this tire won't ever be much farther up in there thanks to where the bump stop is located. But we want to make sure this is never going to be an issue. With that done, even though the front end alignment is still, let's say, rough, I think I could actually drive this car. We gotta test it. Oh, the leaky heater hose situation made a bit of a mess. It's a little cold-blooded when it first fires off, but it cleans up pretty quick. I can taste the antifreeze. It must be evaporating off the exhaust. Now remember, all of this is brand new, particularly the clutch, so no burnouts. It feels lumpy. What's that about? Probably need to check tire pressure. Anyway, whoa. The seat's not bolted down. I can't go anywhere near the throttle. This car just has too much horsepower for this. I might have allegedly let a little bit of smoke out of the back tires. Of course, the camera wasn't rolling. It's pretty good at it. I figured out the weird high pitch noise. It was this extra nut for a ground we don't have on the back of the alternator. I had snugged it down, but the washer was vibrating. I don't know what this rattle is. Well, here we are conveniently parked next to the competition. Ooh, a dog. Choose your fighter. 360 based Magnum Stroker 5-speed or 364 speed? 4-wheel disc or 4-wheel drum? Dana or the other one? Sometimes I wonder how this counts as a job. Then I remember the hundreds of hours that go into projects like this. It's kind of all worth it though. I just hate it. You may have noticed when this thing was sitting next to the Demon, the ride height in the front is now dirt nasty low. It's settled quite a bit since I said it before. That's what torsion bars do. We're gonna crank the adjustment a little bit. We don't want it to be like this or anything. We want a nice little rake, but we certainly don't want the lowered look. I know a lot of people do not like these Krager Soft 8 wheels. And I understand, they aren't what I would have chosen either necessarily, but it's what was available at the time in the size that Dylan wanted. And when I saw this thing outside in the daylight, I kind of started to like it. This thing is so efficient. Running it for that little while and taking it up and down the street and allegedly doing a little teeny tiny burnout was not enough to open the thermostat. Radiator is still cool to the touch. I'm sure it's obvious, but there's a good bit of stuff that still needs to happen with this car before it's ready for the big time. Before it can go for an actual drive, and certainly before it could ever hit a drag strip. Like a power steering pump would be a good thing to have. We're not going to talk about this. I think that's going to do it for this episode, though. We've got a running, driving Dart Sport, and it is awesome. In the next one, well, we're going to have to test it. Until then, as ever, thanks for watching. And remember, if the neighbor guys tell you to do a burnout, well, do a burnout. Dog. That one wasn't me. Alan did that. Hi. Are we friends now? So stinky. All right. Out. Bye-bye.